So, Udi, will you explain for people who are not familiar with this process, just what exactly is bail?
Sure. Look, every year in the United States, millions of people are forced to pay cash bail after their arrest or they face incarceration before trial. This is despite the fact that they are presumed innocent and have not been convicted of a crime. So the way that the bail industry works is that when a person is arrested and cash bail is imposed as a condition of release, what that person then has to do is either pay up that cash bail amount, or what happens oftentimes is that they cannot afford to pay the full amount, so they and usually their families have to turn to the for-profit bail industry,
All right, now,
and
but
they have to.
let's just I want to start there. I mean, what is the theory behind bail? I mean, is it the idea that
Sure.
everybody who gets arrested is going to be some type of flight risk? Is that the theory?
Yeah. So the original idea behind bail, which is an incredibly old idea, I mean, it dates back to the former English system that the United States adopted, is that the courts need to ensure that after someone is arrested, they show up to their trial date. And that as a condition of release, the courts can then impose a money obligation that says if you don't show up to your court date, then you will have to pay the courts this amount of money. What it's turned into, though, and when this system was created, it was never meant to, impose financial obligations that people could not afford, because that wasn't the purpose of it, right? The purpose was to ensure that they show up in court. But what has
And so
happened?
theoretically, and let me just stop you there. So
Sure.
theoretically, right, the relationship between what they can afford, or what the bail is and what they can afford should be consistent throughout, right? It should be a dollar figure that is going to compel them in some fashion, and or I guess provide funds for the court to go out and find them if they don't show up to court. But I
Yeah,
mean,
it's supposed to create an incentive for the individual to show up in court.
okay.
And it's that was the original intent behind it, and that is the system that the U.S. eventually adopted. There was never, when the original intent behind it, there was never supposed to be a profit margin. There was never supposed to be excessive bail. In fact, when the United States adopted the Constitution and later on the Bill of Rights, the Eighth Amendment in the Bill of Rights specifically says that excessive bail should not be imposed. But the concept was that after a person is arrested and they're legally presumed innocent, the courts need to ensure that that individual shows up in court, and therefore a monetary obligation should be imposed that will penalize that individual if they do not show up in court. It doesn't necessarily mean that the person has to put up the money up front, which is known as a secured bond. It could be that, if they don't show up for a legitimate reason, then that financial obligation is imposed on them. But so the initial
And
concept was
presumably,
actually
and presumably that in that
sure.
latter case, the way you could do that would put to garnish their wages or to put a lien on a certain piece of property. Is that how it would happen if you didn't put it up front?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
absolutely. There are a lot of different ways. I mean, the government has a lot of authority and ability to make sure that you pay its debt to it. But the truth is, the reality is that the vast majority of people show up to court. And when they don't show up, a lot of times there are legitimate reasons why they don't show up, right? In rural counties, they may not be able to get to the court. If they're, single parents, they may have child care obligations. They may not be able to take off of work unless they get fired or, otherwise they'll get fired.
Right.
So there's a lot of concepts embedded in this, what was, I think, a legitimate need that the courts were trying to impose.
Okay, so historically, you have this need by the courts, and the idea is that it should fulfill the need, and then somehow this thing gets bastardized, and you write that, and I had I mean, I guess, this is the thing that is sort of surprising about this. I don't think people generally, if they don't have any contact with the criminal legal system, they don't really think about this. But it never occurred to me that there was a legal right to turn a profit on bail. And B, had I known that, it wouldn't have occurred to me that it's only legal in the U.S. and Philippines. Is that right?
That's right. Yes, the idea of for-profit bail only exists in the United States and the Philippines. There was never supposed to. Well, go ahead.
Well, when did we get that innovation? Was that always been the case?
That's a really good question. I do not know the answer to that question, but it certainly is, the status quo right now in the United States, with the exception of a couple of states. But look, I mean, I think what has happened is what oftentimes happens in these types of situations, where the government was looking to remove itself from having to administer any of the relationship. So they hand it off to private industry, and then private industry sucks it up and makes huge financial profits off of it. When most people think of the bail industry, they think of the bail bond shops on their, street corner in downtown neighborhoods, usually, next to a courthouse. And in fact, there are about 25,000 of these local bail bond shops. But what's so interesting is once you lift the veil on these bail bond shops, you realize that actually there's only about, we think 9, but it could be a bit more of big insurance companies that are essentially underwriting the entire business. So those 25,000 bail bond shops actually themselves couldn't afford to put up the cash bail on behalf of the individuals that are borrowing the money. So they rely on big insurance companies. Some of these are multinational overseas companies to borrow the money. And each peg in the system is making a big profit, all on the backs of poor people.
Okay, so Udi, hold on. Let me stop you here because we got to take a break. But when we come back, I want to step back for a moment and just get a sense of what that transaction is with these 25,000 some odd, mom and pop bail bondsman shops that are around the country. And then we'll talk about how they are underwritten and financed by major corporations. And then, of course, we'll talk about what are the implications of having such a massive profit motive by a large, or I should say, a few in the hands of a few concentrated businesses. What is the impact on our criminal legal system to have that type of big money involved in it? I got to take a break. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio. We'll be right back with Udi Ofer in just a moment from the ACLU.